This podcast is brought to you by lightsaber.com.
Welcome to the AI Analysis Podcast. Today, we're going back into deep space with our friends from the Final Frontier podcast. But before we get into the stars, what if I told you that the modern internet, like the inside jokes, the toxic comment sections, the viral media criticism, was actually invented in 1973 by a group of women mailing stapled paper out of their living rooms?
I mean, it sounds like a wild exaggeration, right? But watching Jake and Justin unpack this specific piece of media history, it proves it's actually entirely accurate.
Yeah, we're examining a really fascinating video today. So Jake and Justin are reviewing the Menagerie, which is the famous two-part installment of Star Trek's original series. But, we aren't just recapping a television show from 1966.
Right, exactly. We're looking at how these two modern reviewers react to it today.
Yeah, it feels like you're sitting on the couch watching it with them. We're going to explore ingenious television production hacks, some genuinely hilarious examples of retrofuturism, and the surprising origin of a massive pop culture term that they dig up right at the end of their discussion.
And, that framework is really what makes this material so valuable. Watching people from today analyze the media of yesterday highlights exactly how our societal expectations and, well, our relationship with technology have shifted over time.
Oh, absolutely. The video itself kind of becomes a lens to view our current culture,
Yeah, it really does.
But I want to challenge a premise right out of the gate, though. Early on in their video, the reviewers have this massive realization about why the Menagerie even exists.
Right, the trivia fact about the two-parter.
Yeah, it honestly blew my mind. It is the only two-part story in the entire run of the original series. And they frame what creator Gene Roddenberry did as this absolute genius life hack.
Which is a common way to look at it, sure.
But looking at the context they provide, I have to ask you, was it genius or just, sheer blind desperation that happened to work out?
Well, I mean, desperation is very often the catalyst for what we later call genius, right?
Yeah.
To understand what Jake and Justin are reacting to, you really have to look at the physical reality of television production in 1966.
Right, because it wasn't like it is now.
Not at all. They note in the video that the special effects for Star Trek were completely unprecedented for weekly television at the time. The crew was essentially trying to build a new cinematic world from scratch every single week.
And I'm trying to picture what that actually means mechanically, Today, you render a spaceship on a computer in an afternoon. But in 1966, what is actually causing the massive delay that threatens the entire show?
Oh, it was an entirely physical analog process. If you wanted a ship flying past a planet, you had to physically build and film a model, then paint a massive backdrop on canvas.
Wow, on actual canvas.
Yeah, and then you run those separate pieces of film through an optical printer, which, by the way, was this massive, clunky machine used to chemically composite the images together.
That sounds incredibly tedious.
It was. And because that took so much time, the production team was building up this terrifying backlog. I mean, they were running out of time, burning through their budget, and the network NBC was demanding new material.
They were facing a scenario where the network would simply have nothing to air on television, right?
Exactly. Total dead air.
So Roddenberry solves this looming disaster by writing a script that only required 1 week of active filming. He basically aggressively recycled footage from The Cage, which was the original unaired pilot of the show from 1964.
Yeah, he just sandwiched it right into the middle of this new 1966 story.
And watching the reviewers react to this in the video is incredible because they are, visibly struggling through that recycled footage.
Right. They immediately pick up on this jarring tonal shift. They describe the 1964 pilot footage as feeling incredibly dull and gray compared to the vibrant, colorful energy of the regular series they were used to.
It really highlights how much the show's identity evolved in just 2 years, But even while they're laughing at how boring the old pilot feels, they marvel at the clever editing tricks the crew used to make it all fit seamlessly.
Or the audio trick.
Yeah. There is this one detail they point out about an actor named Malachi Throne. He played a character called the Keeper in the old 1964 pilot footage. But in this bizarre casting choice, he was also hired to play Commodore Mendez in the brand new footage they were shooting for the framing story.
Which is wild. Think about the continuity nightmare that presents. I mean, if the audience hears the exact same voice coming out of two completely different characters on screen, the illusion of the narrative just shatters instantly.
So how do you fix that before digital audio exists? They note that the production team pitched up his voice in the old footage, But they didn't just, push a button on a keyboard like we would today.
No, not at all. They had to physically manipulate magnetic audio tape.
Wait, physically? Like with their hands?
Yeah. They likely played the reel-to-reel tape of his dialogue back at a slightly faster speed, which artificially raises the pitch. Then they recorded that altered sound onto a new master tape.
Oh, wow.
And then they had to meticulously sync that new, higher-pitched audio back to the actor's lip movements on the film negative.
Yeah.
I mean, it was an incredibly delicate analog hack.
When you explain the mechanics of it, I have to concede it is pretty brilliant. It's essentially the 1960s version of a modern clip show, right?
Yeah, that's a great comparison.
You know those sitcoms where the characters get stuck in a bank vault or an elevator and they just sit around reminiscing about past adventures to save the network money?
Exactly. But here, Roddenberry disguised the budget-saving filler by wrapping it in a high-stakes, dramatic court-martial framing device.
Right. The characters aren't just reminiscing, they're literally watching evidence at a trial.
Which is why this remains a perfect case study in how severe creative constraints force innovation. When you completely run out of time and budget, standard operating procedures go out the window,
Yeah, you just have to invent enduring narrative structures out of whatever scraps you have lying around.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Jake and Justin correctly identify that the very structure making the Menagerie iconic was born entirely out of avoiding a complete production disaster.
Well, speaking of things breaking down, the physical structure of the show isn't the only thing under strain here. Watching the reviewers react to the actual plot of this court-martial is where the discussion gets genuinely hilarious.
Oh, absolutely. The mutiny plot.
Yes. The framing story involves Spock, who is, like, the ultimate logical rule follower, committing an unprecedented mutiny.
Right. He hijacks the Enterprise to help his former captain, Christopher Pike, who is severely disabled.
And to pull this off, Spock uses these highly advanced falsified recordings of the crew's voices to issue fake orders to the ship's computer. The reviewers immediately zero in on this.
Yeah, they refer to it as a 23rd century audio deepfake.
It is so striking how a concept written in the 60s maps so perfectly onto our current anxieties about AI voice cloning, right?
It really is prophetic in a weird way.
But the part of the video that had me laughing out loud was how Jake and Justin reacted to the rest of the crew. They kept highlighting this recurring theme they dubbed space racism.
It is a very sharp, very funny observation on their part.
It really is. Because as Spock is systematically stealing the ship right out from under them, characters like Kirk and Dr. McCoy continually defend him.
Right. But their primary defense isn't, I know Spock's character, he's a good man.
No. Their defense is literally, he's a Vulcan, and Vulcans are biologically incapable of lying or subterfuge.
And Jake and Justin found this incredibly condescending. They're practically yelling at the screen, pointing out that Spock is demonstrably fantastic at deception.
Oh, yeah. They list off multiple times he lies throughout the show to outsmart villains, but his friends have put him in this weird, rigid box of positive stereotyping.
Which is such a recognizable flaw.
Yeah, think about your own workplace or social circle for a moment. Have you ever let a positive stereotype about a colleague completely blindside you to what they were actually doing?
Oh, for sure. Like someone is known as the reliable one, so you completely ignore the fact that they're currently missing every single deadline.
Exactly. It's a very human blind spot.
What you're describing, and what the reviewers are observing in the crew's behavior, is the psychological concept of cognitive dissonance.
Right. Because the crew is presented with undeniable physical evidence of mutiny.
Exactly. But accepting that evidence would require them to destroy their foundational, albeit deeply flawed, understanding of who Spock is.
So it's literally easier for them to believe the universe is malfunctioning than to believe their Vulcan friend told a lie.
Precisely. The psychological discomfort of holding two conflicting beliefs. Spock is a Vulcan who cannot lie, and Spock is currently faking voices and stealing the ship, is simply too much for them to process.
So they just bend over backward to reject the evidence.
Yeah. And the modern reviewers spot this immediately because, from our perspective today, viewing a character as a monolith, based on their race, even an alien race, feels completely absurd and illogical.
That psychological dissonance is so fascinating. But speaking of things breaking down, before we talk about the hilariously clunky technology they noticed, let's take a quick break to hear from our sponsor.
Good idea. Yeah, so before the break, we were talking about that psychological dissonance.
Right. And watching Jake and Justin, it's clear that it's matched by a sort of technological dissonance, too. They shift their focus from Spock's surprisingly modern audio deepfakes to the physical technology portrayed on screen.
And they have an absolute field day pointing out where the 1960s vision of the future spectacularly crashed and burned.
Oh, they really do. They focus very heavily on Captain Pike.
Right, because in this story, Pike has suffered a tragic accident and is left with locked-in syndrome. He's trapped in a wheelchair-like device and can only communicate through a single beeping light.
Yeah, 1 beep for yes, 2 beeps for no. And it's operated by his brainwaves.
Which the reviewers immediately start comparing to the real-world apparatus used by the late Stephen Hawking.
That comparison was brutal, honestly. They note how, by the 1980s, our actual real-world technology had already vastly surpassed what this show imagined for centuries in the future.
Right. I mean, Hawking had a sensor that detected twitches in his cheek muscle, which allowed him to scan through a predictive text interface and build entire complex sentences.
Meanwhile, Captain Pike is stuck playing this agonizing game of 20 questions with a single beeping light.
Yeah, it's pretty grim. And beyond the communication device, the physical design of Pike's chair itself draws merciless mockery from the reviewers.
Oh, they tear it apart. They point out that it takes 3 full-grown people just to push this chair around the set.
It's so bulky.
It really is. It has these massive, heavy, visible wheels instead of, like, any kind of sleek hover technology. It looks incredibly cumbersome.
But, to be fair to the production, Jake and Justin do highly praise the makeup used on Pike.
Yeah, they do. They say it looks genuinely upsetting, like high-quality, visceral makeup work that honestly still holds up today.
Well, the makeup holds up because human anatomy doesn't change, right?
Yeah.
But the chair itself is a perfect artifact to analyze the limits of imagination.
It really reminds me of looking at those old magazines from the 1950s that featured concept cars of the future.
Oh, yeah, the ones with the huge fins.
Exactly. The artist draws this wild, sleek vehicle with massive tail fins and bubble glass roofs. It looks incredibly futuristic. But if you look closely at the fine print of the drawing, the artist still assumes the car's going to run on leaded gasoline.
That is such a good analogy.
Like, they could imagine a radical new aesthetic, but they couldn't imagine the lithium-ion battery.
And that is the perfect encapsulation of retrofuturism. Our vision of tomorrow is invariably tethered to the limits of our present-day physical reality.
Right.
The creators of this show could effortlessly imagine faster-than-light travel through the cosmos, because that's an abstract physics concept, but they literally could not conceptualize a medical chair without heavy, clunky, visible wheels.
Because the analog mechanics of wheelchairs in 1966 were all they knew.
Exactly. They extrapolate the massive abstract ideas, but they totally fail to reimagine the mundane physical infrastructure.
Well, the failure to imagine the physical future is one thing. But what blew my mind was how early fandom actually invented our modern digital culture without even realizing it.
This is arguably the most insightful part of their commentary.
Yeah, Jake and Justin bring this entire discussion back to the present day in the final segment of their video, and they share a massive pop culture discovery.
Right, they uncover the true origin of the term Mary Sue.
Which is wild. I mean, if you spend any time reading internet media criticism or watching movie reviews online, you know the term Mary Sue.
It's everywhere today.
It is used constantly. It's generally a shorthand for a character, usually female, who is like inexplicably perfect, effortlessly powerful, and instantly loved by everyone without having to earn it or struggle for it.
Right.
I always assumed that term started on some message board in the early 2000s.
Yeah, most people do. But Jake and Justin find an article detailing that it actually originated in 1973.
1973, and it came from a Star Trek fanzine created by 2 women named Paula Smith and Sharon Ferraro. And here is the wildest coincidence. Jake and Justin realized that the fanzine was literally named Menagerie after the exact story they were just reviewing.
I mean, you really cannot script a better coincidence for a commentary video. It's remarkably serendipitous.
It really is.
And they detail how Paula Smith was getting frustrated with the fan-submitted stories they were receiving for the zine.
Yeah.
Many of them featured idealized, flawless versions of the authors inserting themselves into the narrative.
Right, the self-inserts.
So, as a joke, she wrote a biting satirical story.
The details they read from this article are just so funny. The satirical story featured a 15-and-a-half-year-old half-Vulcan named Mary Sue.
Of course.
She boards the Enterprise, immediately catches Captain Kirk's eye, who falls madly in love with her, obviously. She's praised by Spock for her flawless logic, and then she tragically dies, saving the entire crew.
But it gets better.
Right. She dies only to somehow resurrect herself while the crew makes her birthday a national holiday.
It was just pure, unadulterated parody. And what the reviewers discuss is how this term was originally a playful, self-aware inside joke within a specific community.
Yeah, they highlight a demographic fact that surprises a lot of people today. At that time, this specific fandom was actually about 75% women.
Which totally shifts the context.
It really does. It was women playfully teasing other women about the kinds of wish fulfillment stories they were writing. But I have to ask you, watching Jake and Justin trace the history of this term over 40 years, is the evolution of Mary Sue actually a bad thing, or is it just how language naturally works?
Well, terms always broaden as they scale up. That's just linguistics.
Right. But it does feel like something fundamental is lost when a term meant as a playful inside baseball critique among friends gets twisted by the broader internet.
Yeah, it went from a surgical scalpel used for satire into this blunt instrument used to complain about female characters who just display basic competence.
Exactly. It's a profound shift in utility.
It is. But it perfectly illustrates the evolution of participatory media. To understand the impact of this, we really have to look at the physical mechanics of zine culture.
Because it wasn't digital back then.
Not at all. In the 1970s, participatory media wasn't a digital forum. It was physical labor. I mean, fans would type out stories on typewriters, copy them using mimeograph machines, staple them together by hand, and then mail them across the country using physical postage stamps.
Wow! It was literally the internet comment section, printed on paper and distributed through the postal service.
Precisely. This story encapsulates how the blueprints for modern fandom were drafted 50 years ago.
That makes so much sense.
Yeah, the very ways we analyze, critique, and passionately argue about media today, like the inside jokes, the tropes, the pushback, it was all established by people running off mimeographed pages.
So Jake and Justin aren't just reacting to an old TV show. They're excavating the foundational architecture of the modern internet.
Exactly.
That is so wild to think about. We think we're so cutting edge with our memes and our media analysis, but Paula Smith was literally doing it in 1973. It really makes you rethink where our online culture actually comes from.
It is a dense and rewarding piece of commentary to analyze, precisely because it connects all those historical dots.
It absolutely is. And, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, building on a tiny, almost throwaway detail that Jake and Justin mentioned near the end of their video.
Oh, about the lost footage.
Yeah. They noted that the original unaired pilot footage from 1964, The Cage, was actually lost by the studio for years. It was presumed completely destroyed.
Right. The only reason it survived is because Gene Roddenberry kept a personal black and white 16mm reel on his own desk.
Which is crazy. The full-color version wasn't fully recovered from various Hollywood archives until the late 1980s.
Yeah, it took decades.
So think about the implications of that for a second.
Yeah.
If Gene Roddenberry hadn't been backed into a corner by a special effects delay, if he hadn't been forced to cobble together the Menagerie in a frantic one-week panic just to save the network from dead air, those color scenes from the original pilot might have vanished forever.
They absolutely would have.
It is a compelling, almost haunting reminder of how much of our cultural history is preserved not by careful archiving, but through strange, unintended workarounds and happy accidents.
Truly. Sometimes, a desperate television life hack is the only thing standing in between a piece of art and total erasure.
We really do owe an enormous debt to those moments of creative panic.
We really do.
Well, thank you so much for joining the discussion with us today, and keep looking for the hidden histories in the media you love.
The Final Frontier podcast. These are the voyages of Jake Boger and Justin Spur. Our weekly mission, to explore memories of Star Trek's strange new worlds, to recall the search for new life and new civilizations, to boldly go where no one has had the spare time to go before.